I'm Jeff Henry. I'm the VP of Product Management for several of the mainframe products, including mainframe operational intelligence. We're going to take a panel today and go through, what have we been seeing in the marketplace? Why this big push around machine learning, and specifically some of the ties to automation. So before we jump into it, let me allow my panelists to actually do a brief introduction for themselves as well. Patrick, you want to start?
I'm Patrick Barres, so I'm from Europe. I'm working at BNP Paribas Fortis. That is the Belgian branch. The main headquarters are in Paris. I am the mainframe PO, so the product owner. Under my umbrella are Ops and VS, so I'm for the automation responsible. Automation points, I have also SysView, CA Vantage, View, Delivery, Spool, CA1, and I can go on.
Greg?
Yeah, I'm Greg Payne from Southwest Gas. It's a local company here, headquartered here in Las Vegas. I'm the primary ZOS systems programmer. I've been on the validation team for MOI and been very pleased with what I've seen.
Thank you. Rick?
And I'm Rick Romanowski. I'm from UPS. I am a sysadmin for ESP workload automation on the mainframe. We also have ESP running on Windows and Linux servers, and we also use Ops MVS too.
So before we jump into it, I just want to make sure that I highlight this is a partnership for every product we actually do. I mean, part of the key value that we get out of Agile development is that every time we go through one of our sprints, we play it back with our customers, we get their feedback, we help get their direction on are we focused on the right things, are we not focused on the right things. So when we've delivered some of these products, it's just as much their product as it is ours. So as we get into some of the conversations here, we'll draw out some of those experiences, but it's certainly also one of those that I would suggest, as we're over at the PEDS afterwards, come and ask us and come volunteer, come sign up. Would love to have more validation customers. So as we get into it, let me just ask you, it seems to be a more and more challenging environment for IT operations, especially when you start branching into things like how do we collaborate across DevSecOps? How do we handle all the additional data coming in, and how do we just keep up? So let me hand off. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing, Patrick?
We have many challenges. Do I have much time?
Hey, go for it.
So you have the volume increase. Each month we have enormous number of transactions, and it's constantly growing. We have the challenge of the IT people. So I am already old. I'm 60. And the average time in my team is about 45. So we don't have any youngsters. I wonder why. And that's merely a problem of the university, I think, or students. I think with the new initiative, and perhaps we can attract more youngsters for it. The other challenges is the product complexity. We have an enormous amount of products. The complexity for it is huge. Like I said, the volume that is each month produced, it's enormous.
And Greg, how about yourself?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges. I mean, we actually have, on average, an older workforce. So we've had in the 10 years that I've been with the gas company, we've had a lot of retirements, and in some cases, actually in most cases, those positions have not been replaced. So, so they've not been filled. So we've had to buckle down, do a little bit more each ourselves, to keep things running. Our primary CSS, our customer service system, runs in the mainframe, and it's small, but we average anywhere between 600,000 and 700,000 CICS transactions a day, just on that application alone.
Yeah. Rick, how about yourself?
Well, we have similar problems what everybody else is facing. We were a trucking company, and in the 1980s, we became a technology company. We hired a large number of people. Guess what? All those people are old now, and a lot of them are walking out the door, and they're walking out with a lot of knowledge. In addition to that, my group, when I started 12 years ago, we had 6 people. Now we have 3 people. When people retire, they don't replace them. They realign groups. We're doing more work today with less people than we were when I started. And I don't see that trend changing.
So I've heard over and over again, and we've talked about it some in this conference, about what are we doing about the skills? How do we help from both making the product simpler, as well as what we can do to actually bring more skills to the table. And we've certainly done some of that internally, as we need to do that as well. I'll come back to that in a little bit later, but I want to shift focus a little bit here and come back to one of the things I hear time and time again in my customer briefings, and in all the meetings I had over there the last couple of days, is when a problem happens, how do you react? What happens? Just give us a scenario for when a problem happens. How do you actually handle it? Does everybody jump on a bridge call? Patrick, how's that play out?
Well, I can talk about a real life problem that probably everyone who is working in the mainframe environment has touched it. And if you have, for example, a spool full, what happens, in fact, people start complaining, TSO users, they cannot log on anymore. Transactions are getting timed out because they cannot start it anymore, etc. You get overwhelmed with a lot of tickets. In fact, the root cause is a spool full, but you have another bunch of tickets that are side tickets. In fact, not the root tickets, but side. And you need to deal with them also, with those side tickets or side root causes. In fact, what we did was, with automation, and automation is key for it. That's also kind of how we solved more or less the problem for people getting old and getting retired and not being replaced, is to automate as much as possible all the processes that are in fact giving us problems. So what we did in first time was adding a spool automatically, a spool volume. But in fact, that is not enough, because that spool volume is effectively 1 minute or two later filled up also. So in fact, you need to get to the lower track, in fact, to the green zone and from MII, and see what is behind some hours before, if a process is going out of that green zone. And in fact, pinpoint it and raise an alert, in fact, to not have a spool full condition later on.
So the rest of you, same kind of thing from a reaction, get caught up in some of those initial alerts, or anything you want to add there?
Not so much. I mean, thankfully, we don't have a ton of problems on the mainframe. When we do, typically just 1 or 2 people from the mainframe services teams gets called. Then we immediately get involved to find out. We actually did have a catastrophic JES 2 admin within the past couple of weeks. That was a little hairy, but we were able to get JES restarted with the right people. So actually, automation automatically restarted JES for us.
Nice.
So we try to automate as much as possible, and just so people don't necessarily have to make a decision by themselves. So where we know that we want to do something specific, we try to go ahead and automate it, so we don't have the human factor, waiting for it.
Anything you want to add?
Well, things we've done is, one is we try to drive down our Java bends, because unfortunately we're just reactive right now. And even though we're running more work through every year, we actually have less Java bends, which is a good thing. But being reactive, that means we're always in the one step behind.
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've created tools for our operators, so before they call me, they can do the things that I would do, which might prevent calling me. If it's a bad problem and we get on the bridge, that depends who's on the bridge. If you got the right people on the bridge, we might be off in 5 minutes. If you got the wrong people on the bridge, it's not good.
So it's certainly been a trend that I've heard from many of our customers. And when I try to summarize some of the market trends that are driving us in the direction of really trying to focus on how to make the system smarter, how to bring that intelligence to the table, so that it's not always your SMEs that are having to actually dive in and know everything from the tribal knowledge and get back to some of those skills issues. We kind of break it down in these categories. The first being, how do you get all the right people on the bridge working together from the same visual set of data? And instead of it being just the spool data or just the JES data, how do you bring that together so that you understand how all the data and the relationships are actually interacting with one another instead of everybody having their own screen? And then we've tried to move into the, well, how do I take advantage of things like machine learning so that you can look at what's normal? It was surprising to me that as I get into a lot of the conversations with our customers is, it's not always known what normal looks like. So when something goes abnormal, unless you happen to catch it through some of the alerts and the automation, that it can be bypassed until someone calls and you have to react to the problem. The next step really came down to, you talked about, it's about the root cause. You can spend all kinds of time looking at all these individual alerts. If I can't see it together as a pattern, if I can't see it together as the cluster, how do I actually get to root cause? And then moving into, how do we help some of these folks get to that prescriptive guidance? Your SMEs, as you've said, getting older. All of us that have a mainframe background are getting older. How do we make it simpler for that tribal knowledge to come to the surface so that your generalist can at least do that initial triage and get down into it? And then one of the things we're trying to make sure that we're differentiating from CA, and that we've heard time and time again, is don't wait to automate it. At every step of the way, if we can leverage automation, that allows us to make it that much simpler, that allows us to make it that much quicker, that allows us to get really to a prescriptive model. So before I just go on about how I'm seeing the market, is that similar to what you all are seeing? Let me start in reverse order here. Let me pick on Rick first. It's like, are these the trends that you're seeing? Is this where you're investing your own time and resource?
Well, we're looking at it right now, but again, we're still reactive.
Yeah.
We need to take that next step because we know what's happening. Do more with less.
And the automation has been a key for you so far?
Automation has been a key. We have a lot of in-house automation tools that we've done, and that's how we've been able to drive down the need for increasing headcount while still increasing the volume.
Yep.
So, we're doing good at what we do, but again, we need to get out of the reactive business and be more proactive so we don't get on the bridges that nobody wants to be on.
Yeah. And Greg, how about yourself? I know you've been invested with us around some of these. Are these the trends that you're trying to react to as well?
It is. Again, with we have a much smaller staff now than what we did when I started 10 years ago, all really because of retirements. And we know for a fact that they've even reduced staff within the data center, so we've had to institute some more automation because now the consoles aren't monitored as closely as they used to be. So, because of that, that's why we've had to institute the automation, because we don't necessarily have somebody there to be able to react to something. So, we don't want anything at all. Anything that involves our CSS always turns into a really ugly problem, especially for the group responsible. So, and kind of looking at the MOI, and I'll say test driving, I see some real potential there. Am I ready to pull the trigger on some of these things? Probably not just yet, but I definitely see great potential.
Yeah, there's a reason why a lot of folks talk about it as a maturity curve. We're all trying to get comfortable, learn from our experiences together, see where we can really take it to the next level. So Patrick, what about you? I know we've talked a little bit about the automation. What also about like the visual collaboration? Is it easier to bring some of these tools together? Is that the trend you're actually seeing companies take?
Well, what I also see is, or what I like to see it, my point of view is, we have now all these kind of applications, SysView, Ops MVS, Vantage. In fact, I like to see them as planes. They are aeroplanes. And in fact, they are separated. They are spread over the terrain, the domain. And in fact, what we need to have is that all these planes connect you with data hub, like in a normal big like here in the States or in Europe. And this data hub, I see the potential for the MII, so that you can combine all the events from all the different products and have a single point of view, a helicopter view on it, and pinpoint, in fact, to the problem, and that you can see, in fact, the cluster around it and what's happening in real time.
Very nice. So let me go ahead and jump into, so obviously a lot of this buildup and a lot of the partnership has been around what we're doing with operational intelligence. And that first piece was really about how do we stop looking at each individual data element with our own monitor, with our own individual view, and then force it upon you all to figure out how to bring that together. So when I look at those data sources, last year we were here talking about what we were doing with performance. And since then we've complemented that, bringing the Vantage view into it, bringing storage, bringing networks, bringing performance and systems. And with what we're showing in our proof of concepts behind you and on the demo floor that if you haven't gotten a chance to look at, please come join us. We're also bringing some of the data from SMF records. So opening that up beyond CA products. We're bringing other distributed products in. So we have an example from our distributed side of the house with AXA. So more of the user behavior, not just operational data, but what's the user behavior around those websites look like. And then we're opening it up with other products that actually bring in some of the performance and the rolling 4-hour average costs associated with our latest DCI acquisition. So then bringing those together, what can we do with it? That's where we've really invested from a machine learning standpoint. We started last year showing anomaly detection. So when you bring in that performance data, those systems data, how do you know what normal looks like? Well, the system would learn using some of the kernel density estimation algorithms what normal looks like. So what happens on a Saturday when you're running some batch jobs may not be the same thing that happens Monday when you first fire up the production systems. So trying to manage off of a static alert or static threshold can be very time consuming, costs a lot of maintenance, etc. But then we've taken it to the next step. And Patrick was being a great lead into the how do you actually cluster that together and understand how the systems data relates to the storage data, relates to the performance data, relates to the application. When the banking application is running slow, why? How do you get to that root cause? How do you get to those relationships? Machine learning allows us to learn from the history of what's already been stored. We know these data sets better than anybody else. We dumped the data there in the first place from the tools that you were using. But now if we can mine from that, we can look forward and say, when do we see something going out of whack, something going out of normal, and take predictive or proactive action on it and tie that back to the automation to try to solve something before it happens. So with automation, when we first started with this and what we delivered first was, well, if I can take an alert from SysView and I can kick off a trigger an ops MVS script with a static alert, why can't I do that with a dynamic alert? So that was an easy one. Well, maybe my engineers in the back wouldn't actually think it was quite so easy, but it was at least an easy first step. The next step was, well, it's not always something that I can just do. People are the ones that lead this. The systems can automate it, but where are people needed? So then we showed linkage into process automation and release automation. And the latest things we're showing on the demo floor behind you are how to tie that to dev. So what can we do to actually tune the applications that seem to be going awry? Or how do we know if some bad code got checked in? How do we look at some of the reports that come out of things like mainframe application tuner? And we're linking that to the predictive economics capabilities with dynamic capacity intelligence as well. If you see the rolling 4-hour average start to go out of whack, what do you do about it? How do you actually understand the SLA management aspects associated with that? So let me pause and stop, the sales pitch element of this and come back to the partnership. So Greg, you've been working hand in hand with us the whole way through this. When we first started it in SysView, what we've done with the clustering, what's been your experience and what are the benefits that you see?
Since I first fired it up, which has actually been quite some time ago, it was a little bit of an eye-opener and a lot to bring in. I love the alerts and the whole idea of being, as it can learn and be able to cluster the alerts, it's a great idea, because then now maybe you don't have to look at the alerts individually and and for yourself try to figure out exactly what's tied together, what's not, and so on. I know in some discussions that I've had with people here, now I'm even considering even expanding what I'm pulling in to help build baselines actually related to applications. Something that I originally hadn't even thought of. I thought, I just use this just as a system tool, but with the discussions, I'm thinking that maybe doing, pulling in a few of the really key production batch jobs that we run, it might not be a bad idea to go ahead and start pulling these in to MOI as well, and again, try to build some kind of baseline for these to see if if there's something there that either, like you say, potentially some bad code that comes along. The idea is just expand the use and essentially expand our knowledge of what's really going on.
Yeah, I mean, Greg brings up a good point, and one of the things that we're asking for volunteers, looking for people to work with us, and that's, we've seen this work now for performance data, storage data, all the data points on the one side. But we're looking to open up that API now. We're using a common API for those products internally. We've expanded it to include SMF data, but we're looking for partnerships to now say, what else could we do? It's just time series data. The algorithms that are being used here are some of the same algorithms that our payments guys are using. We've been able to move from it used to take us 8 weeks worth of data to learn what normal is. We've gotten that down to 2 to 4 weeks, so helping us, helping the payments team, helping the other groups that are using these same data science principles, data science platform. But we're really looking for what's next. So in the same way, Greg, you were talking about, through the partnership, the art of the possible reveals itself. When we look at how these things come out, it's very easy then to be able to say, what else could I do with this kind of time series data? So I ask for anybody who wants to work with us around this open API. I've learned from past experience. You've taught me from past experience, don't publish an API too early and then change it numerous times. So we're trying to make sure that we get that partnership so that we can actually harden this and publish it and open it up for other use cases. So Rick, what about, this isn't a product pitch, so I'm not
Sure.
just supposed to be sitting up here talking about MOI. What about automation? So,
Well, I mean, like I said, we've actually automated more since we've had a number of retirements. I mean, automation's a great help for us. We wouldn't be able to survive the way we are without the automation piece in place.
Yep.
And we have done tons and tons of work over the last few years doing cleanup, making sure things were working the way they really should, doing enhancements. I mean, it's been almost a full-time job for myself because I actually handle most of the automation work myself. So, but I'm actually finally expanding and teaching a few others to help along.
And Rick, what about you? I know this is one of those that, it goes beyond just what we can do with IT automation, but, with workload automation and some of the process automation as well.
Well, for us, what we've done is just pretty much all in-house automation, and we've seen savings from that, and that helps us a lot. But again, that helps us for stuff when it runs normally.
Yep.
We still have, when there's a problem, we're reactive. And
Still scramble.
We need to get out of that, yes.
And Patrick, I know we've been working on quite a few of those ops cases. How has that played out, and do you see the same type of potential benefits as we actually move forward in these partnerships?
Yeah, certainly. For automation, we have done a lot of automation. It's mainly driven by our control room people, so because they are now asking for it, because also the number of people there are retiring and getting less, so they are in fact in front of the demand for more automation. In fact, it can help us really, because as a bank we need to do a lot of transactions, and a lot of transactions in time. So this means we're doing a lot of payments for SWIFT, and there is a time stamp on it. So the number of the money needs to be transferred before a certain time. And that's really strict. If we don't handle it or we don't cope with it, there are huge fines with it. And I talk fines with millions of dollars. So these are really huge. And with OpsMVS, we have managed to cope with, because otherwise we would not met these temps. So, and it's also in the zone of security. I think there is something that can be done, because if we have like a transaction for someone and it's for bank, it's always a transaction. If you have some transaction that is going to be in Belgium where I live, and now suddenly there is a transaction going on my account in France, well, that is not just. If the transaction takes place in the US where I'm now, okay, that's okay. So these things could perhaps be combined with sensors, with the ATMs, because if the ATM senses here my card, okay, and I am in the United States, then it's okay. But if I'm not in France, if the operation takes place in France, and it's not on an ATM who is digitally secured because you need to enter a PIN, that's another kind of question. Because I have had the problem here when I arrived in the States and I wanted to use my card, it was declined.
Oh yeah.
So that was really frustrating. So I called up the company and I said, well, you have done a transaction in France for 2,000 euros. It's around $2,500. So it wasn't me. So they blocked the card, my bank, and I talked to them and it's okay. I said it wasn't me. But now, luckily, my wife is here with me. She has her own card. So now, for the moment, I'm living out of the hands of my wife.
Well, I want to connect them with some of the guys from Visa here later and see whether we can actually work some of it out. So you bring up a really good point. I want to come back to the two of you as well before we move forward. A lot of times we get stuck with what's the IT problem? How do we reduce MTTR? How do we move to a predictive time to resolution, or a predictive time to avoidance? But it's always about the business. And unfortunately, a lot of times when I'm reaching out to the line of business, they're looking at you all as IT's the problem. And one of the things we're trying to actually do through this more transparent visibility is to be able to show how IT wasn't the problem. So one of the first steps that I hear over and over and over again is, let me at least be able to show what we're saving. Let me be able to show how this automation is actually helping us stay compliant. Let me be able to at least show that it wasn't my problem. What are some of the other business aspects when you're working with your line of business where these types of being able to do the full loop instead of every individual product on its own that is allowing you to answer that in a more productive way or a more collaborative way? Well, anybody jump in?
Just your first problem, whenever it's a problem, it's always an ESP problem. So the first thing we have to do is prove it's not an ESP problem before we can even work on what the real problem is. And most times, guess what? It's not an ESP problem. So once we get past that, then we actually start looking at what the real problem is. So it's, we've already wasted some time because we're not working on the real problem.
Greg?
Yeah, I actually see some of that as well. A lot of times when certain problems arise, for whatever reason, sometimes the mainframe comes up as, oh, it's the mainframe's fault. Unfortunately, so yeah, we have to go to prove that it wasn't our fault, which I find fault in it in the first place. But we do a good job, and and we can typically prove our point, and we can usually help, even if it's not the mainframe problem, because we have so many ties to so many other, I'll call them sub-applications that are tied to my CSS. We can usually help diagnose and point them in the correct direction. It takes collaborative work to do so, but we can usually do that.
All right. So let's take a step forward and look at So where do we think the art of the possible is going here? We talked about, you heard Ayman this morning, you heard Otto this morning, talking about how we're leveraging machine learning, how we're leveraging AI, how we're leveraging analytics. So we just talked about what we're doing internally with operations, but the possibilities are far beyond that. So let me just open it up with, where do you think that this technology can take us? What are some of the next steps when you look at where we can go beyond just the operations view, where we can actually leverage embedded intelligence? And what's the right balance? Because in some instances, we see other vendors saying, here's your toolbox, go for it.
Well, for me, I think machine learning can take us a long way. Again, we're having to do more with less, so we have to be able to do our jobs more efficiently. For me, that's something that I always try to do anyway, but any tool that I can use to help me do my job better and quicker, it's better. And then, if I can learn it, then other people can too. And then we can teach other team members to be able to utilize products like this. Because being human, you can't catch everything. So that's why with machine learning, it typically doesn't miss anything, because he sees all the data and we don't.
Rick, Patrick, anything to add?
Well, he sees all the data and he reads it correctly, which we don't always do. Machine learning for mainframe is actually a new concept for me. We all know about it from everybody does analytics on everything, but we really think of that on, more from a consumer's perspective. What product can I sell you? Google does it, Facebook does it, everybody's doing it just to drive more people there, thinking differently and saying, how can this make my applications better? That's it's a new concept to me, but it does make sense, and I can understand the value in it, and it would be a good thing for us.
Great. Patrick?
Yes, the machine learning can certainly help us a lot in where it's time consuming, because if a ticket arrives in my team, we are at level 3, so the 2 before, if they are unable to handle it, well, a ticket can take up a lot of time. Usually it's more than 2 hours to solve a ticket. So you need to look up in TCP/IP logs. It's network related. You need to look up in other logs, in ops log, in sysview. You need to crunch a whole lot of data before you can pinpoint or find the root cause. So it takes up a lot of time. If a tool would help me in pinpointing to the root cause, to the real root cause, that would benefit a lot in time.
Great, thank you. Certainly one of the things we're hearing from our partnerships, so I'll give you an example. One of the playbacks we did where, in working with customers and these validation partnerships, we would ask, in order to validate our machine learning, we need your data. Because if all we use is our test data, you don't really have enough data points to prove whether the algorithm is working the way you expect it to or not. So we've been taking our customer data and then feeding it back so that the customer could see, what was really happening in real time. One of the customers threw us a bit of a curveball and said, we had an outage last week, find it. And we stepped back and it's like, well, that's not really the POC we typically do. That's a good challenge, let's go for it. Within 5 minutes, they found the problem. And when they looked at the timestamp, it was 2 hours before this particular customer had ever been called that they had a problem. It was 5 hours before they had any idea where the problem actually was. But then when they actually looked at the operation visual screen, it was so blatantly obvious that then they started talking about, well, if I can look at what normal is, if I can look at what the cluster is, and it's that obvious to me, well, you're not making me take a whole bunch of tools and figure out which logs I need to go parse and then how I get the right data and then how I continuously maintain it. You're building it into your tools. Where can we go next? So Greg, let me just take you back to when we did one of these playbacks, what was the outside or what was the insight that you saw from it? And how did that make you decide, do we take the next step forward? Do we not take the next step forward? How did that help in the progression?
Well, I mean, to me, it's definitely an eye opener. I mean, you know, because of what I've done, and you know, and you work in a place long enough, in a position similar to mine, you know, you kind of think you know what the norm is. It's nice to see that, if you want to say, verification that you're right, but then also too, I also seen other things that I'm not as right as I thought I was. And the data doesn't lie, and you know, just having that whole history as it's streaming data for us anyway, it's been a real eye opener, and you know, to expand on you know, with this machine learning, of course, I think not in all cases, you know, it's still got to take some human intervention, but again, a tool like this sometimes makes it really apparent as to what's going wrong, you know, and in the case I actually talked about here yesterday when we had an auxiliary storage shortage, when I looked at it through MOI, it was just blatantly obvious as to what was going wrong.
So let's use that and jump into a subject that you guys were pretty passionate about in the beginning. Let's come back to skills, because this is one that we know that the skills are aging out of our marketplace.
Sure.
We know that the mainframe in general has been pretty complex. It can do a whole lot, but sometimes it's harder to do than some of the other systems. So certainly one of our investment areas is to come back and make it blatantly obvious. But as everybody's talked about with machine learning is, you know, just because we can find a pattern doesn't mean that that's necessarily true. We need to be able to bring that tribal knowledge and bring those SME skills back into it to be able to help the machine learn. So how do you see that balance working? How do you look at where do we need to make the tools smarter or the tools simpler? And where do you look at it as, you can only make it so simple, we need to be able to get the next wave of SMEs? Patrick, let's start with you.
You can certainly add some extra SME knowledge into the tool, and because if the tool detects something, it's therefore the problem is not fixed. So you need to have the expertise in it, and it's always not right to jump on it and take first action. You need perhaps to go back and see what can be done or what are the consequences when you take an action. It's also like it's mentioned this morning, and do you trust your car if you are in an intersection and he drives alone? So the intelligence can perhaps be there, but do you trust it?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's certainly one that we keep coming back to. It's like, just because you have the smarty pants math under the covers and can do all that black magic, I may not trust you. And I'm certainly not going to trust you the first time out. So one of the things that we're trying to use machine learning for is to come back and say, can you give me a prediction and allow me to like jump in and give you some sentiment analysis? So those are some of the areas that we're driving to in the future, that we're bringing into the product with the latest release as far as what those prediction and what those likely outcomes are from the patterns we've seen before. It's also an area that, unless we actually get that kind of partnership and feedback to understand whether what we designed in the interface is right for your team, and we can do a lot of interesting, smart stuff with technology. That doesn't mean you can consume it. So how did that experience go for you, Greg, when we were actually looking at not only from a skills standpoint, but how do we make it consumable? Are we reaching the right balance between doing a lot under the covers and making it consumable so that you trust through those iterations?
Well, I mean, you know, using the validation program, the way it's being done, I think that in itself is a very large help, because then it gets these things out in front of what I consider the real world and the real users. So it's helping form these products, and not even just MOI, to a more customer-driven direction for products. And being the fact that I'm on a number of different validation programs, I've seen that in so many different of the products that we actually utilize, and it's an extremely large help. Because as a user of an individual product, you know how you use it, and you know, and so you understand as well or better what you need to see, how you need things to function. So I mean, you know, to me this needs to continue, and you know I think that's gonna help with the trust between the customer and the vendor as these new things come out.
So Rick, do you think that this is getting us back to the how do we balance the skills issue, making the product simpler, getting customer, but also bringing that SME knowledge to the table?
Well, one of the things that was mentioned this morning was in the next 8 years, 75% of the workforce is going to be millennials. Maybe the millennials should take that as an opportunity, that there is this need that's out there, and maybe you don't care whether you're a Linux programmer because that's what's cool and that's what we're taught in school, and that's where they're telling you everything's going. You know, we've been lying to people for years that the mainframe's dying. It does not appear that that's going to happen. So maybe people should take an opportunity, just like back in Y2K, you know, it was great to be a COBOL programmer. There was a lot of jobs, you got paid a lot of money, or 5 years before Y2K, to fix all these programs that were going to blow up. Getting back to how much we are comfortable with, another example that was given was none of us here are probably ready for a car to drive ourselves. But I think we're all comfortable with cruise control, right? You go down the highway, you set that at 75, even though it's 65, and you go down with the rest of the traffic, and you're comfortable with that. Maybe that's what would work in my world, where you gave me a little chunk of it, we get to try it, upper management gets to see it, and says, oh, you know what? I don't want just cruise control, I also want the next thing, and give me the next thing.
A great straight man. So how do we see the future of where we're actually seeing this self-driven data center? And let's use this as the topic to wrap up. So what are your closing comments on where you actually see the future of this going? And what is that right balance to make sure that we're not trying to actually say, it's all automated, you don't need to actually worry about it, because nobody's going to believe that in one full swoop. So let's come backwards. So Rick, you were on a roll there.
It's still a little bit of science fiction to me.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. The other thing they talked about this morning was low code and no code. I mean, is it we're going to create content and it's going to work and it's going to fix itself? I mean, we will probably be there as fast as CA wants. I don't know if I believe that. But it's a nice vision.
Yeah. Greg, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I still think we have a long way to go. To me, there's always times when human intervention is going to be required. I don't think that's ever going to stop. Again, that's just from my own experience. So, is it a good thing? Potentially. I know from my first impressions on using MOI, those have all been positive. But I still think that we have a way to go.
Patrick?
I agree with my colleagues. So if everything should be automated, I was out of job. So, and I don't think that the complexity will go down. So instead it will increase. So this will add additional burdens on new softwares. So I think CA need to step up for each time to cope with these increased complexities.
Yeah, I think certainly what we're seeing and what I got out of the keynotes this morning is it's just going to create more opportunity. So as we get some of the simple stuff moved out of the way, as we start leveraging some of the self-driven data center principles by at least being able to take advantage of something like machine learning to handle that much data, the opportunities are going to open up for us to go to the next level, to really push the next extreme. And an easy analogy was given to me probably over drinks last night about a pilot. I don't know about you, but when I fly home, I know that the cockpit is mostly automated now, but I want there to be a pilot in there if something goes wrong. So I don't think there's any way that we're letting the data center drive itself. We need those SMEs, we need those skills, we need the capability to go optimize and be able to take it to the next level. But I think all of us can agree that man, if we can get some of that simple stuff out of the way, if we can have more insight as we
Sure.
actually drive forward, if we can do it in a visual manner that just makes it easier, everybody would be a lot happier. So with that, I'm out of time. It's blinking at me up here. I appreciate your attendance. I appreciate people that come view it afterwards. I would certainly appreciate you guys joining us in more of the validation programs. And for those of you I see in the audience that already are, thank you. It's been a great help for us actually building the products that you say you want and we want to deliver to you. So thank you for the ongoing partnership.